A boy who hasn't spoken in 3 weeks stands up in a courtroom. Nobody moves. Outside, the city doesn't know. Inside, a judge with 15 years on the bench feels something she cannot name move through her chest like cold water. The foster parents in their expensive suits. The lawyer with his filed documentation. The social worker with her overloaded case files. All of them certain they know exactly how this morning ends. They are wrong. The boy looked directly at the judge, and he says 4 words, quiet, clear, certain in the way that only someone who has been holding a truth for 8 years can be certain. You know my mom. The lawyer's pen hits the floor. The foster mother's face goes very still, and the judge, 15 years, never once lost her composure, grips the edge of her bench until her knuckles changed color. Because the boy is not confused, he is not lying. And somewhere beneath her robe, beneath 15 years of professional distance and carefully maintained calm, she already knows he is right. Elias Boyd had learned very early that the safest thing a person could do was take up as little space as possible. Not invisible, just small. Small enough that decisions got made around you instead of about you. Small enough that the adults in the room forgot to look too closely. Small enough that when the next move came, and it always came, you were already packed in your own way. Already braced. He was 8 years old, and he had done this 6 times. Yes, he sat in the front row of courtroom 9 with his shoulders pulled forward and his eyes on the floor, and both hands wrapped around a photograph he had not let go of in 3 years. The photograph was small. The edges had gone soft from handling. There was a crease down the middle where it had been folded once, a long time ago, by someone who needed it to fit in a pocket. He kept it flat between his palms. Not tight, not loose. The way you hold something you cannot afford to lose. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor cleaner, and the particular staleseness of a room where difficult things happened regularly. Morning light came through the tall windows on the east wall and crossed the carpet in long pale stripes. A clock ticked somewhere above the door. Elias did not look at the clock. He looked at the floor and he listened. The Elwoods were talking. Sandra Elwood had a voice that was always slightly too even. Controlled in a way that sounded like calm but wasn't. He had learned the difference. Real calm didn't need to work that hard. We've done everything we were asked to do, she was saying. Private school. Therapy twice a week. His own room. New furniture. Every resource. Tom Elwood said, "We have other children in our home who are thriving." He paused. Adjusted something. A cufflink, probably. He did that when he was performing. Elias is disruptive, Tom said. He won't engage. He hasn't spoken in over 3 weeks. Elias kept his eyes on the floor. 3 weeks and 2 days. But who was counting? He heard a pen set down, then a page turning, then silence of the kind that meant someone at the front of the room was thinking. He had been in enough courtrooms to know the rhythms. The filing of papers. The throat clearing before a lawyer spoke. The particular weight of a pause that meant a judge was about to say something that mattered. He looked up. The judge was a woman. White, early 40s, dark hair pulled back. Sharp eyes behind glasses she wasn't currently wearing. She'd set them on the bench, sassaged the file, and was looking at him directly without them, which meant she was choosing to see him slightly less clearly, which was interesting. Most people looked harder when they put their glasses on. She was looking at him like he was a question she hadn't found the answer to yet. He looked back. Something happened. He couldn't have named it. Not then. It was not recognition in the way people use the word. Not faces matching faces. Not names connecting to names. It was more like the specific sensation of hearing a piece of music you've never heard before, but that sounds impossibly like something you already know. He tightened his grip on the photograph. The lawyer, Bradford, compact and quick, the kind of man who moved through room like he'd already measured them, stepped forward. Your Honor, my clients have provided extensive documentation, school reports, therapist notes, their pediatrician's assessment, the behaviors described, the night terrors, the selective mutism, the failure to engage, make Elias an unsuitable match for their household. failure to engage. Elias had heard that phrase before. Different houses, different voices, same phrase. He had a theory about it. The phrase meant, this child will not pretend that everything is fine, and the people who used it believed that pretending everything was fine was the same as everything being fine. He had never managed to agree. The judge said, "What kind of disruption specifically?" Sandra spoke. "Night terrors, screaming at 3 in the morning. We found him once outside, just standing in the yard, barefoot, in November." She shook her head. "He'd been there for almost an hour." Elias remembered that night. He didn't remember why he'd gone outside, only that the house had felt too small, and the night had felt more honest than the rooms. The judge set down her pen. She looked at him again. Not the way Bradford looked at him, and not the way Sandra looked at him, not like a problem or a file or an unsuitable match. More like she was waiting for something, like she thought he might be about to say something worth hearing. "Elias," she said. Her voice was different from the others, lower, more direct. It didn't have the particular softness that adults used when they were about to say something they didn't mean. "My name is Judge Weston. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I want you to know that what happens in this room today matters, and your voice matters. If there's anything you'd like to say, I'm listening." Elias looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. Bradford cleared his throat. Tom shifted in his chair. Sandra glanced at her watch, and Elias Boyd stood up. Patricia, the social worker, reached for his arm reflexively. He didn't shake her off. He just stood. The photograph shifted slightly in his hands. The room went very still in the way rooms do when something unexpected is about to happen, and everyone has already felt it coming, but nobody has moved yet. He opened his mouth. "You know my mom," he said. "You went to school with her. I've seen your picture." The courtroom did not erupt. No gasps, no scrambling. Sandra made a soft sound that she covered quickly. Bradford set down his pen with a small click. Tom went completely still. The silence that followed was not empty. Judge Weston's face did not change, not visibly. 15 years on the chin teaches you to keep your face still while the rest of you catches up. Her hand stayed flat on the surface in front of her. Her eyes stayed on Elias. He stared back at her. Not defiant, not desperate, just steady. The way someone looks is when they said a true thing and are waiting to see what the world does with it. "Court will take a brief recess," she said, level. Controlled. Professional in the way that's also a form of armor. 15 minutes. She stood, she walked, she did not run. But she moved with a purpose that had nothing to do with the Elwoods or Bradford or the file on her bench. Elias watched her go. He sat back down. He looked at the photograph in his hands. He had not taken it out. He had held it through the whole thing, both palms flat around it, and now he held it the same way he always held it. The right amount of pressure, not so tight it bent, not so loose it slipped. Patricia leaned close. "You okay?" He nodded. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. She was one of the better ones. She understood that silence was not always the same as not being okay. The Elwoods were whispering to Bradford. Bradford was scrolling through his phone with one thumb, already pivoting, already recalculating. That was the thing about Bradford-type lawyers. They were always 3 moves ahead of the current moment, which meant they were never quite in it. Elias was in it. He was completely in it. He pressed the photograph between his palms and waited. Judge Weston's chambers were on the other side of a heavy door at the back of the courtroom. She closed it behind her. She stood at the window for a moment. The morning light came through at an angle. She could hear faintly Bradford's voice through the door, already managing, already a framing. She let the sound wash past her. She went to her desk and sat down and pressed both palms flat against the surface. "You went to school with her." The file said Elias had been in 6 placements. The file said he hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. The file said failure to attach, behavioral issues, unsuitable match. The file did not explain what she had just seen. A boy who had been silent for 3 weeks, standing up in a courtroom and speaking, not to beg, not to cry, but to state a specific fact. calmly, clearly, with the absolute certainty of someone who has held one true thing so long it has become structural. She opened her desk drawer, the bottom one. Inside, a small collection of old photographs she'd kept there for no good reason, except that she hadn't known what else to do with them. The box at home felt too deliberate. The drawer felt more honest. Things she kept without quite admitting she was keeping them. She went through them slowly. College, law school, a summer clerkship, a birthday dinner she remembered because of the cake, but not whose birthday it had been. She found it near the bottom. Second year of law school. 7 people on the library steps on a summer afternoon. Everyone squinting against the sun. She was there, third from the left, and there on the far right, arm around someone. Laughing at something off camera with her whole face the way some people laugh, completely without self-consciousness. Renee Boyd. Carol sat with the photograph in her hands and let the memory come in. They had been close for exactly 2 years. She had always thought of it that way. Not best friends, not close friends, just close. The way 2 people can be when they are in the same place at the same time and both paying attention. Renee had been pre-med, brilliant and quietly fierce. She had wanted to be a pediatrician. She had said once, in the specific way that some people say things, not casually, but as a statement of intent, that she plans to work with kids in unserved communities because nobody had done that for her when she was growing up, and she had decided at 17 to change that. Carol had believed her completely. The last time they'd spoken, Renee was starting her residency, exhausted, still burning. They'd lost touch the wadis lose up when life splits into different lanes, and the calls get less frequent and then stop. Carol had not called back the last time. She had told herself it was because things were busy. That was what she had told herself. She looked at the photograph. Then she stood up. She smoothed her robe. She went back to the courtroom. Elias was exactly where she'd left him. The Elwoods had returned to. Bradford was looking at his phone. Patricia was speaking quietly with the court assistant near the door. Carol sat down. She looked at the boy. "Elias," she said, "I'd like to speak with you privately. Would that be all right?" He looked at her. Then he nodded once. Small. Like someone spending a coin they've been saving. Bradford began to assemble an objection on procedural grounds. Carol raised one hand without looking at him. He stopped. The small conference room adjacent to courtroom 9 had a round table meant for mediations and a bowl of wrapped candies that nobody ever touched. The walls were the color of something that had once tried to be calming and given up. Patricia sat in the corner. Elias sat across from Carol. He kept his hands on the table. The photograph was in his sweater pocket now. She could see the slight shape of it through the fabric. "You don't have to talk," Carol said. "I want to start there. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say." He looked at the table. "But I want you to know that what you said in there, I heard you, and I'm taking it seriously." A pause. "Can I ask you something?" He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. "You mentioned a picture. You said you'd seen me somewhere. Can you tell me about that?" Elias reached into his pocket. He placed the photograph on the table between them. Carol looked down. It was not a photograph of Carol. It was a photograph of a woman, black, mid-30s, seated in what looked like a hospital garden. Soft light. One hand resting over a rounded belly, 8 months along at least. She was looking slightly to the left of the camera, like someone had just said her name. She was almost smiling. The kind of almost that means something else is sitting just behind it. Carol recognized her. The recognition moved through her fast and cold, like stepping off a curb you didn't see coming. Renee, pregnant, the fullness of late pregnancy. The particular way she was holding herself, careful and proud at the same time. Carol turned the photograph over. Written on the back in neat, careful handwriting, "Your real mother. She never knew you lived." The room was quiet in a way that had weight to it. "Where did you get this?" Carol asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Years of practice, not always a gift." "The third house," Elias said. "There was a woman there. She was nice. She read me stories. She didn't yell." He stopped. Started again. She said she used to work at the hospital, where I was born. She said they lied about what happened to me. He said it plainly, not with drama. The way children sometimes state devastating facts. Clearly, without the weight adults have learned to load around them. What happened to her? Carol asked. She was gone the next week. Other people came. Nobody explained. Carol kept her hand still. Did she tell you her name? He shook his head. She just gave me the picture. She said keep it safe. She said someday it would help me find my way. He looked at the photograph on the table. I've had it since I was 5. 3 years. He had carried this for 3 years, through 3 more placements, through the Elwoods and their locked door management and their strategy of wearing children down, through every adult who had told him in one way or another that the things he remembered weren't real or weren't appropriate to discuss. 3 years, and he hadn't let go. Carol looked at him. He looked back. Not with the blankness that some children showed after sustaining trauma, the kind that was really a door, shut from the inside and locked. This was something more deliberate. He was watching her the way someone watches a path they aren't sure is solid yet, waiting to see if it held weight before committing a step. Elias, she said, I believe you. Not, I believe something happened. Not, I believe you experienced something. Just, I believe you. He looked at her for a long moment. The other grown-ups didn't, he said. When I talked about remembering things, they said kids my age can't really remember. One lady said I watched too much television. What kinds of things do you remember? Carol asked. From before. He thought about it carefully, not performing the thinking, actually doing it. Sounds, he said. Not real music. More like someone singing quietly. The singing people do when they don't think anyone is listening. He looked at his hands, and a smell, like rain but clean, like soap and a heartbeat. He paused. I know that sounds strange. No, Carol said. It doesn't. He looked at her and something shifted, not trust exactly, not yet. More like the door not being quite as firmly shut as it had been 10 minutes ago. She didn't push. She stayed. Later, in her chambers, Carol thought about Renee. Renee Boyd would be 47 now. The math was simple. They had been the same year in law school, both 23. That was 24 years ago. Renee had been pregnant when Carol last saw her, which meant she had been 39 when Elias was born, older for a first pregnancy, which the hospital would have noted in the file, which Slade would have known, which meant. She stopped herself, one thing at a time. She picked up the phone and called David Osei. The Elwoods case was dealt with by end of day. Bradford made his points. Carol addressed them efficiently. The relinquishment was accepted. Placement termination approved. Elias would not be returned to the Elwoods. He would not go to a group home either. That was the part Bradford wanted to argue. The part where Carol stated clearly that Elias was being placed in certified emergency foster care pending further review, with herself as oversight contact on the case. Unusual. Bradford said so. Carol looked at him over her glasses. I'm aware, she said. Proceed. After the session, back to her chambers and stood at the window with her hands in her pockets and thought about David Osei, an old friend, now working as an independent legal researcher, and what she needed him to find. She called him. New Dawn Placement Agency, she said when he picked up. Based in this state. Closed roughly 6 years ago. I need everything. Leadership, funding, legal proceedings, complaints, any names that come up more than once. Timeline, yesterday. A pause. That kind of call. Yes, she said. That kind of call. She ended it and sat for 4 minutes with her phone in her hand before she made the second call. 4 minutes was a long time to sit still when you knew what you needed to do. She dialed. 4 rings. Then, hello, a woman's voice, clear, guarded. The voice of someone who had learned not to expect good news from unknown numbers. Rennie, Carol said. It's Carol Weston. We went to law school together. She stopped. I know it's been a long time, and I know this is going to sound. I don't know what this is going to sound like. A breath. I think I may have found your son. Silence. Then where? One word, no question mark. Just the word, flat and urgent, 8 years of something enormous collapsing into a single syllable. Carol closed her eyes. Harborview, she said. He's safe. He's here. Come to the courthouse on 5th and ask for me. Any time. I'll be here. She set the phone down. She looked at her desk. At the old photograph from law school she'd brought in from the drawer and set face up on the surface. Renee, laughing at something off camera, complete and unself-conscious. Then she looked at the file. Ace Boyd. 6 placements, 8 years. She pulled the blank legal pad toward her and wrote one name at the top, Dr. Conrad Slade. It was the name on the death certificate in Elias's intake file. The attending physician on record for the delivery. The Mateen who had signed the document that started all of this. She underlined it twice. Then she called Patricia and arranged for Elias to be placed that night with a certified emergency foster parent named Mrs. Adeline Caldwell. 22 years of emergency placements. A reputation for not asking children to be ready before they were, and a house that smells like something baking, even when nothing was in the oven. Will she have him for long? Patricia asked. I don't know yet, Carol said honestly, but she'll be good for him while we figure it out. After she hung up, she sat alone in her chambers as the building emptied around her. The clock above the door ticked. The light through the windows moved and changed, and finally went amber with the end of the afternoon. She thought about a boy who had carried a photograph for 3 years through 6 houses, and had stood up in a courtroom and spoken. Not to beg, not to perform. Just to state a truth he had been holding since, before he had words for it. She thought about what that cost. Not in the abstract, in the daily grinding, accumulated sense. The energy required to hold something true when everything around you applied pressure in the opposite direction. The specific exhaustion of being told repeatedly that the thing you knew was not the thing that was. He had not let go. She did not intend to either. She picked up her pen and began to write. Outside, the city moved in its ordinary way. Somewhere in it, in a house that smelled like something baking, a boy named Elias Boyd was being shown a room with a bed and a window and a lamp that made the light warm at night. He would reach into his pocket before he slept. He would hold the photograph the way he always held it. And for the first time in a long time, not the first time he'd hoped, because hope was not something he'd ever entirely managed to stop doing. The hoping would feel like something more than reflex. It would feel like information. Like the floor was solid, like something true was finally moving toward him through all the noise. Gloria Tate called back at 6:47 in the morning. Carol was already at her kitchen table. Second cup of coffee. The new Dawn files David Ossie had sent over the night before spread across the surface in rough groupings. Corporate filings here, financial records there, a separate stack for the names that appeared more than once. A legal pad with questions down the left margin and no answers yet on the right. The phone rang and she picked up before the second ring. Judge Weston, low voice, deliberate, the voice of someone who had learned to measure words before spending them. I got your message. Carol had sent the message at 11:30 the previous night, after David's preliminary research had surfaced and attached to a terminated nursing license and a forwarding address in the same county. She had not expected a call before 8. Mrs. Tate, thank you for calling. A pause. Careful. How did you find me? Personnel records from Harborview General, Carol said. You worked in labor and delivery for 19 years. You were terminated 6 years ago. They called it a pattern of conduct incompatible with institutional protocols. Flat. Like something said so many times it had smooth. That's what they put in the file. What would you call it? No hesitation. Telling the truth. Carol looked at her legal pad. Mrs. Tate, I need to ask you something directly. All right. Did you give a child named Elias Boyd a photograph of a woman named Dr. Renee Boyd while you were serving as his foster placement approximately 5 years ago? The silence this time was different from hesitation. Not calculation either. It was the sound of a woman who had been holding a door shut for a very long time, feeling the handle turn from the other side. Yes, Gloria said. And did you call Dr. Renee Boyd approximately 8 years ago to tell her not to sign any final paperwork? That her son was alive? The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a laugh and something that had no clean category. The sound of 8 years releasing pressure through a very small opening. I've been waiting for this call, Gloria said. I didn't know if it would come, but I've been waiting. Carol set down her pen. Can you come in today? In person. I need to hear everything from the beginning. A pause. Yes, Gloria said. Tell me where. Carol arranged the meeting away from the courthouse. A conference room at a downtown legal aid office where she did occasional pro bono consultations. No cameras in the corridor. No Bradford-type lawyers moving through with their polished shoes and their filed documentation. Neutral. Private. The kind of room where people could say things without wondering who else might hear. Before Gloria arrived, Carol made one more call. Ray Birch had been recommended by David Ossie 2 days earlier, after Carol had described what she was looking at. Former state police, 15 years, moved to private investigation, after what he described as the difference of professional opinion with his department. He was not warm. He was not interested in being warm. He looked at a problem and saw geometry, angles, distances, points of connection, and found this sufficient. She had hired him that morning before the call from Gloria. She told him to start with New Dawn's financial structure. Not the declared accounts. The money that moved before it entered New Dawn's records. How deep? He asked. All the way, she'd said. She also asked him in the same call to make contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Not to brief them yet, just to identify the right person. The person who would know what to do when the time came. He said he'd see someone. He would make the call. Now she sat in the legal aid conference room and waited. Gloria Tate arrived at 9, 58 years old. Medium height. Natural gray in her hair, cut close. A dark coat and a large canvas bag that she set on the table with the care of someone who had packed it deliberately and knew exactly what was inside. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed this meeting 10,000 times in her head. Not nervously. Methodically. The way you prepare for something you've been waiting years to do. She sat down. She reached into the bag. She placed a 3-inch binder on the table, worn at the spine. Color-coded tabs down the right edge. The kind of binder that takes years to build and represents a decision made early and sustained through difficulty, to document rather than simply witness. She didn't open it yet. I was in the room the night Elias was born, she said. July 18th. Renee Boyd came in at 36 weeks. There were real complications early on. I want to be clear about that, because they've used the early complications later to make the say hold. But by the time we were in delivery, the baby was healthy. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, strong cry, everything you want to see. She stopped. Let that sit. Dr. Conrad Slade was the attending physician. I'd worked with him for 11 years. He ran a clean room. He was efficient. He was respected by the administration in the way that administrators respect someone who generates revenue and doesn't create friction. She looked at the binder. He was also the center of something I didn't have a name for at first. Because when you're inside a system, and the system has been functioning a certain way for a long time, you normalize it. You tell yourself the things you don't understand have explanations above your pay grade. You tell yourself there's a protocol. She looked at Carol steadily. The night Elias was born, Renee was placed under general anesthesia for the delivery. The emergency C-section was called on the basis of fetal distress. I believed it at the time. The instruments were consistent with distress, but I've thought about this for 8 years, and I believe the readings were manipulated. I can't prove that part, but I believe it. Carol said nothing. She let her talk. After the delivery, Slade gave me instructions I had never received in 19 years of nursing. He told me to take the baby to a specific room, not the NICU, not the regular nursery, a room on a floor that was not where newborns went, and to document the birth as a stillbirth. The room held the words, "I didn't do it," said plainly. Not proudly, as a fact. I took Elias to the regular nursery. I told the nurse on duty there had been a miscommunication. I spent 40 minutes trying to figure out who to talk to, and then two nurses I had never worked with before came to that floor. They said there was a family matter, a transfer, that they would handle documentation. She paused. By the time I understood what was happening, Elias was gone from that floor. Renee was still in recovery. Dr. Slade had already filed the death certificate. Carol looked at the binder. "What's in there?" she asked. Gloria opened it. 8 years, she said. Dates, names, internal memos I shouldn't have copies of. Payment records routed through the hospital's administrative accounts in ways that only make sense when you understand what they were paying for. Names of other nurses who were asked to do things they didn't question, or did question, and were moved off the floor within the month. She turned to a tabbed section near the back. And this, she pulled out a sealed envelope, smaller than the folders around it. A handwritten label on the front, Slade, Audio, Feb 2016. I started carrying a recorder after the third case, Gloria said. After I filed an internal complaint and had it dismissed in 4 days without any investigation. I understood then that the path through the institution was closed, so I documented what I could. She looked at the envelope. This recording is from a meeting in Slade's office, February 2016, between Slade and a man named Dwight Pruitt, who ran New Dawn Placement. She did not open the envelope. She didn't need to describe what was on it in detail. Her face said enough. They discussed pricing, she said. What the market was for different profiles. They use words like inventory and placement, capacity, and candidate criteria. She held Carol's gaze. They were talking about newborn babies. Something moved through Carol's chest, cold and specific. How many cases, she asked. That I documented. 16, between 2014 and 2018. I believe there were more I didn't catch. And the targeting, black mothers, Gloria said. Quiet, direct, no decoration, single, educated, healthy. Women who came in alone. Women with limited support networks. Women who could be isolated in those first hours after delivery, when everything is overwhelming and someone in a white coat tells you something and you don't have the resources to fight back. Carol thought about Renee, mid-residency. Her husband had died the year before Elias was born. She had come to that hospital alone. 39 years old, first pregnancy. Everything Slade's operation looked for. They chose her deliberately, Carol said. Yes, she matched every criterion. Carol looked at the binder, at the years of work it represented, at the woman across from her who had carried this alone and had not stopped. One more thing, Carol said. The call you made to Renee Boyd, right after the delivery. Gloria's hands were still on the table. Yes, she didn't know it was you. No, I called from a payphone. I was afraid. I had a daughter in college. I didn't know yet what I was dealing with or how far it reached. She paused. I have thought about that call every day for 8 years. Whether it was enough, whether I should have done more sooner. It kept her fighting, Carol said. I know. Gloria looked at her hands. It wasn't enough. But it was what I could do that night. It was more than most people did, Carol said. Ray Birch arrived at the legal aid office that afternoon with his own files. He was 52. Solid, the kind of man who communicated primarily through the arrangement of dots on a surface. He spread his materials next to Gloria's binder without ceremony and began. New Dawn Placement. Incorporated 2012. Dissolved by the state 2018 after an audit flagged financial irregularities. The audit was narrow. It only examined New Dawn's declared accounts. It did not examine the source of the money entering those accounts. He tapped a page. I did. A pause. He let it sit. New Dawn received payments from 19 private individuals over 6 years. Payments routed through intermediaries. Some through law firms as legal fees. Some listed as charitable donations to a foundation that existed only on paper. Some as consulting contracts for services that were never specified. The amounts range from $85,000 to $430,000 per transaction. Carol looked at the numbers. Those are the buyers, she said. Yes. Families who paid for placement. The higher amounts correlate with what Gloria's records describe as premium candidate profiles. Mothers with specific health backgrounds and characteristics the buyers had requested. He pulled out another page. On the receiving end. After New Dawn took its cut, payments moved to 3 individuals. 2 were senior administrators at Harborview General. The third. He set the page in front of Carol. She looked at the name. Judge William Hartley, retired, 3.5 years ago. Currently in Sarasota, she had known him. Not well, but she had known him. CT years is on family court. A gentle manner. Very efficient with paperwork. People always said that. Cases moved quickly through his courtroom, which had been understood as a compliment. He fast-tracked adoptions, Ray said. Connected to New Dawn cases, we've identified 7 so far. No full hearings, no independent review. All signed off within 72 hours of filing. Can we prove the payments caused the rulings? The timing is very hard to argue with, but timing alone won't close it. We need the audio recording authenticated and admitted. That's the foundation. With that, the payment records become evidence of a pattern rather than coincidence. Carol looked at Gloria. The recording needs to go to the FBI, Carol said, through proper channels, authenticated before anything moves. Gloria nodded. I know. I've been ready for that. Ray pulled out a separate file. He set it on the table with a different quality of deliberateness. Not the financial documents, not the institutional records. Something else. There's one more thing, he said, about the Elwoods. Carol looked up. Sandra Elwood, born Sandra Patricia Reeves. He let the pause do the work. She worked for New Dawn Placement from 2013 to 2017. Her title was Child Transition Coordinator. And Tom? Listed as a contracted driver for New Dawn in 2014 and 2015. New Dawn had no declared transportation operations in their official filings. The silence in the room shifted. So they were moving children, Carol said. Moving them between placements. Between these initial buyers and the foster system when buyers decided they didn't want to continue. The Elwoods function as a mechanism. They receive children who are problematic for the operation. Children who remember things, or whose first families backed out, or who are old enough to ask questions. They use psychological pressure to silence those children. When that fails, they return the child to the system with a behavioral file thick enough to discourage anyone from looking closely. Carol sat back. She thought about Elias. 6 placements, every file noting the same things in slightly different language. Failure to attach. Behavioral issues. Unsuitables match. A file that had grown thick enough by the time he reached courtroom 9 that a less attentive judge might have processed the relinquishment in 20 minutes and moved on. He had not failed to attach. He had refused to forget. Ray, she said, how long before you can confirm the payment link between Hartley and New Dawn? 48 hours, maybe less. And I've made contact at the FBI, he added. Financial Crimes Division. There's an agent named Patricia Flores. She works child trafficking cases specifically. She's been aware of New Dawn peripherally for over a year, but didn't have the evidentiary foundation to move. When I described what Gloria has, she said she needed to see it. Set up the meeting, Carol said. This week. Already done, Ray said. Thursday morning. Good, Carol said. And keep this room quiet until we're ready. Renee Boyd arrived at the legal aid office on a Thursday morning. Not at the courthouse. Not at any official location with fluorescent lights and the particular institutional smell of systems processing human beings. Carol had arranged it here deliberately. Neutral ground, morning light through clean windows, no procedural formality. Renee was 47 years old and looked like someone who had been in a long fight and was still standing because stopping had never been an option she seriously considered. There was compression in her. The quality of sustained pressure, sustained over years, carried in a way that didn't show until you looked directly at the eyes. The eyes showed it. Carol stood when she came in. They looked at each other across 15 years of silence. You didn't have to come in person, Carol started. I've been waiting 8 years for a phone call, Renee said. I wasn't going to wait one more day. They sat. Carol told her everything, the file, the placement history. New Dawn, Gloria's binder, Ray's financial findings. The photograph, she placed it on the table, looking them. Renee looked at the photograph for a long time without touching it. When Carol finished, Renee was quiet. Then she said, he has a birthmark on the back of his left shoulder, about the size of a quarter, irregular shape like a coastline on a small map. Carol looked at her. I never told anyone that, Renee said. When they told me he hadn't survived, I asked to see him. They said it would cause additional trauma, that it was better not to. I was on medication. I had been in surgery and I was barely. She stopped. They put papers in front of me and I signed them. I don't fully know what I signed. I couldn't read them properly. I just signed. She looked at the window. 6 months later, when I could think again, I filed a malpractice complaint. It went nowhere. They had a death certificate. They had 3 hospital staff members on record with the SAM account. They had my signature on forms I had signed while medicated. She paused, and I had nothing, just the feeling. The absolute, unshakable feeling that something had happened in that room that was not what they described. What kept you going? Carol asked. Renee's hands were still on the table. About 2 weeks after I filed the complaint, I received a phone call. Unknown number. A woman's voice. She only said one sentence. Renee looked at Carol steadily. She said, don't sign any final agreements. Your son is alive. Then she hung up. Carol thought about Gloria, about a pap phone, and a daughter in college, and a woman trying to calculate how much she could risk. Did you know who called? Not then. I spent years trying to figure it out. Renee shook her head. But that call was why I didn't stop. Every time I came close to accepting it, every time the evidence against me piled high enough that I almost believed I was wrong, I came back to that call. Someone had been in that room. Someone knew. Carol thought about the woman Elias had described. The third placement. Nice. Read him stories. Gave him the photograph. Gone the next week. She looked at Renee. There's someone I want you to hear about, she said. A woman named Gloria Tate. The question of when and how Renee would meet Elias was not a procedural one. It was a human one. And human questions required different handling. Carol thought about it for 2 days. She talked with Patricia, who had been Elias's social worker throughout, and who understood his rhythms better than anyone currently involved. She talked with Dr. Ann Burrows, a child trauma specialist brought in to consult. Don't tell him who she is before he meets her, doctor. Burrows said. Let him arrive at that himself. Give him agency in the moment. What if he shuts down? Then you give him time. You don't push. She paused. This child has survived 6 placements by being extremely precise about when he extends trust. That precision is not a symptom. It's a skill. Treat it like one. Carol arranged the meeting for a Thursday afternoon, the same conference room at the legal aid office. Afternoon light instead of morning, which made the room warmer. Patricia in the corner. Carol near the door. Elias came in first. He'd been told someone was coming to meet him. Important. That was all. He sat in the chair nearest the window, looked at his hands. The photograph was in his pocket. Then Renee came in. She stopped in the doorway. Elias looked up. Neither of them moved. Carol had prepared herself for drama, for the kind of scene that made simple emotional sense. What she got instead was something quieter and more real. Elias looked at Renee the way he looked at unfamiliar ground, scanning for what was solid, what would hold, what he could trust his weight to. Not cold, not closed, just careful. 8 years of careful. Renee looked at him and went absolutely still. She held everything she had behind her eyes. What showed on her face was not tears. It was something more durable than tears. The expression of a woman who has been looking for something for 8 years and has just seen it across a room and is making absolutely certain before she takes a step. She walked to the chair across from him. She sat down. Hi, she said. Soft, even. Hi, Elias said. Silence. Open, not pressurized. Renee said, I heard you like drawing. Elias blinked. Who told you that? He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at the wall. I do okay, Elias said. What do you draw? He thought about it. Buildings, mostly. And in between things. In between things, how a building looks when it's half shadow and half sun. Or a bird right before it lands. Not the still part, the almost part. Renee was quiet for a moment. That's a very specific way of seeing, she said. The lady at my third house said that too. He looked at Renee carefully. She said my mom was a doctor. A kid's doctor. Pediatrician, Renee said. Yes. She said you wanted me, he said it simply. A fact he had carried for 3 years and was now setting on the table between them to see what it did. She said they told you I didn't make it, but that wasn't true. Renee's hands were very still. No, she said. It wasn't true. Did you know? Not at first, but I didn't believe them. She held his gaze. I never stopped not believing them. Elias looked at her for a long time. Then he said, I have a birthmark on my left shoulder. I looked at it in the mirror once. It has a weird shape. Renee breathed in. About the size of a quarter, she said, like a small coastline. He went very still. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, they were wet at the corners. Her voice stayed steady. I know exactly, she said. The DNA test was arranged the following morning. Carol used a private lab, a doctor she trusted for discretion and speed. Cheek swabs, quiet, standard processing time, 5 business days. 5 days. During those 5 days, Elias stayed at Mrs. Caldwell's house and went to Spal school and ate grilled cheese on Tuesday and Thursday because Mrs. Caldwell had quietly noted his preference after the first night and deployed it with the consistency of someone who understood that Flunk's small reliabilities mattered enormously to children who had experienced large unreliabilities. He did not talk much about Renee, but he stopped checking the lock on his bedroom door before he slept. Mrs. Caldwell noticed. She didn't say anything. She noted it the way she noted most things. Quietly, with the understanding that some changes were too important to name out loud before they were ready. On the second day, he overheard a fragment of a phone call. Carol's voice from the kitchen while he was in the hallway. We need to move before they realize what we have. He stood very still for a moment. He didn't know who they were, but he had a feeling they were the kind of people who appeared in his nightmares. He went back to his room and drew buildings until the feeling settled into something manageable. On the 4th day, Rab Roth sent Elwood photograph to Mrs. Caldwell's house. Carol sat with Elias at the kitchen table. Patricia was present. She showed him the photographs without explanation. Old social media archives from New Dawn, public records, nothing that could be challenged. He went through them slowly. He stopped. His finger landed on a group photograph. 8 people in front of an office building. Professional smiles. He was pointing at Sansra, not at a woman 2 people away, but at Sansra herself. Different hair than he knew. A few years younger. But the jaw, the set of the eyes, the exact way she held her chin when she thought she was being observed. That's her, Elias said. You're certain? Carol said. She used to make this face when she was annoyed. He demonstrated a slight flattening of the mouth, the eyes going watchful and flat. She made it a lot. When I talked about remembering things. He set the photograph down. She told me once that nobody was looking for me, he said. That the people who had me first decided they didn't want me and moved on. She said, that's what happens with some kids. They just don't take. He was quiet for a moment. She said it like it was a fact, like I should understand and stop asking. Carol looked at him. She was wrong, she said. I know. He looked up at her. I always knew. I just couldn't prove it. He reached into his pocket, took out the photograph, set it on the table next to the New Dawn staff photo, looked at both of them for a moment. Then he put the photograph back in his pocket, picked up his pencil, and opened his sketchbook. The DNA results came back on a Tuesday, the full 5 business days as promised, not a day faster. Carol was in her office at 8:43 in the morning when her phone buzzed. She read the message once. She read it again. 99, 97% probability of maternal biological relationship. She sat back in her chair. She gave herself 1 minute. Then she called Ray. We have it. Good. Thursday. That's when we brief Agent Flores with everything. Gloria's binder, the audio recording, your financial documentation, the DNA confirmation, all of it together. We don't move in pieces. Agreed, Ray said. I'll set it up. She ended the call. She sat for another moment. Then she called Renee. The phone rang twice. Carol. Renee's voice. She already knew. You could hear it the way sus sounds when they have been waiting for something so long they can feel it arriving before it lands. It's confirmed, Carol said. 99.97%. Silence. Then a sound Carol would think about for a long time afterward. Not a cry in the way the word usually means, something that didn't have a category. The sound of 8 years of sustained pressure finding, finally, a place to go. Carol stayed on the line. She didn't rush it, didn't fill the silence with anything except her presence. Because sometimes that was the only thing that helped. Just someone staying. Just the line remaining open. Elias was told that afternoon. Mrs. Caldwell sat with him at the kitchen table. Patricia was there. Carol sat across from him, with the results in her hand, and told him simply and directly. The test came back, she said. It confirms that Dr. Boyd is your biological mother. He looked at her. Then he looked at the table. Then he said, I know. He sat with it for a moment. The quiet, careful settling of something enormous that had been suspended and was now finding its permanent shape. After a while, he looked up. What happens now? He asked. We keep working, Carol said. There are people who did something very wrong. We're gathering what we need to hold them accountable. That takes more time, but it's moving. He nodded. And Renee? He tried the name carefully, testing the weight of it in his mouth. She wants to see you as much as you'll allow, Carol said. On your terms, at your pace. Nobody is going to rush you. He looked at the table. Then, can we have the grilled cheese tonight? Mrs. Caldwell, who had been standing in the kitchen doorway, exhaled something that was mostly a laugh. Already on the stove, she said. Elias nodded. He reached into his pocket. He took out the photograph. He held it for a moment. The right pressure, the right steadiness, the grip he had maintained for 3 years, and then he set it flat on the table in front of him. He looked at it. Not like someone guarding a secret anymore. Like someone looking at a thing that had already arrived. The DNA results came back on a Tuesday. 3 days later, Agent Flores confirmed the FBI was ready to move. The arrests did not happen all at once. Carol had to explain this to Renee first, then to Patricia, then in a different way to herself. Because there was a part of her that wanted it swift, clean, the way justice looks when you imagine it versus the way it functions when you are inside it. In practice, after Flores gave the green light, it took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Ray Birch coordinating with Agent Flores and 2 other FBI field agents who had been, it turned out, building parallel cases for longer than any of them had realized. A financial crimes investigator in a separate division had flagged New Dawn's shell accounts 14 months earlier, but had not yet connected them to Harborview General. When Ray's documentation landed on the right desk, the 2 investigations merged and the pace changed. 3 weeks of Gloria Tate's binder being processed, cataloged, authenticated page by page. 3 weeks of the audio recording. Office, February 2016. His voice flat and businesslike while he and Dwight discussed the pricing structure for newborns, like 2 men reviewing a supply chain. Being examined by the FBI's forensic audio team and confirmed as unedited, unaltered, admissible. 3 weeks was a long time. It was also, given that the thing being dismantled had been running quietly in a trusted institution for 6 years, not very long at all. Carol spent those 3 weeks doing 2 things. During the day she worked the case, calls with Ray, calls with Agent Flores. The careful, methodical work of ensuring that every piece of evidence was placed correctly in the chain. Nothing exposed to procedural challenge. Nothing moved before it was ready. She also, 4 days into the 3 weeks, called Mrs. Caldwell to arrange a transition. The DNA confirmation and the formal custody proceeding that followed, handled through a different judge, given Carol's involvement, established Renee as Elias's legal guardian pending full adoption proceedings. The transition happened on a Saturday morning. Mrs. Caldwell made breakfast. Elias packed his bag, which did not take long because he had never fully unpacked it. An old habit, built over years of learning that permanence was not something you assumed. Mrs. Caldwell walked him to the door. She was not a woman who made speeches. She put one hand briefly on top of his head, just for a moment, and said, "You did good, kid." He looked at her. "Thank you for the grilled cheese," he said. She laughed. The real kind. He walked out to where Renee's car was parked, at the curb, got in the passenger seat, and put his bag on his lap. Renee looked at him. He looked at the road ahead. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She drove. Conrad Slade was arrested on a Wednesday morning. Ray called Carol at 7:14. She was in her car outside the courthouse, not yet ready to go in. They picked him up at his home, Ray said. 6:45, apparently in the middle of making breakfast. Did he resist? No. His attorney arrived in under an hour, which means he'd been told to expect something. A pause. They also picked up Pruitt. He was at his brother's house outside the city. Been there 3 days. Someone tipped him, but not fast enough. The Elwoods later today. The warrant cleared an hour ago. Carol sat in the car. She thought about a hospital room 8 years ago that she had not been present for. A woman in a medicated haze. Papers placed in front of her by a man who understood exactly how vulnerable she was and used that understanding with the precision of someone who had done it before. Who had done it 16 documented times before. Possibly more. "Ray," she said. "Yeah, make sure they get every count right." Nothing left on the table. "Already on it," he said. She got out of the car. She went inside. Sandra and Tom Elwood were arrested at 2:17 in the afternoon. Elias was in art class when it happened. He was working on a drawing, a building, the shadow-to-light line he kept returning to, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He wasn't supposed to have it in class, but Renee had arranged quietly with the school that he keep it on in case. He looked at the screen under the table. A message from Carol. "It's done, both of them. You're safe." He read it twice. He put the phone back in his pocket. He picked up his pencil and finished the drawing. Ray brought the Ava file to Carol's office on a Friday afternoon. She sat off her desk with the expression of a man who was not going to pretend the news was simple. During the Pruitt interviews, he said they identified another family, connected to New Dawn. They received a child through the agency in 2015. He tapped the file. The child's name is Ava. She's 11 now. She was placed with this family as an infant, just under a year old, when her first placement fell through. She's been with them for 9 years. Carol opened the file. The family was named Garrett. Walter Garrett, a cardiologist, well regarded. His wife Helen taught high school. Their home had been reviewed twice in 9 years through standard foster oversight, both times rated exemplary. "Is there evidence they knew?" Carol asked. Ray was quiet for a moment. "Nothing conclusive. They paid New Dawn's listed adoption fee. High, but within the range that could be explained as legitimate private adoption costs. The documentation they received appeared complete on its face. Ava has been enrolled consistently in school. Her teachers describe her as settled and social." Carol closed the file. She opened it again. "Ava's biological mother," she said. "Her name is Patricia Owens, 34 years old now. She was 23 when Ava was born. Single, no family support in state entry-level administrative work. She received a stillbirth notification from Harborview General. Same pattern, same attending physician." "Slade," Carol said. "Yes, and Patricia Owens now." She filed a complaint the following year. Got nowhere. She's been in therapy on and off. She too works. She functions. Ray looked at Carol steadily. She has not stopped looking. The room held that for a moment. This was the part that didn't resolve cleanly. Justice for Patricia Owens existed in genuine, irresolvable tension with 9 years of a child's life. 9 years that were, by every available measure, good years. Years of consistency and care. And Patricia Owens had 9 years of something that also could not be undone. What does the law say? Carol asked, knowing the answer. Asking anyway. The law says the Garretts received a child through a criminal enterprise. Regardless of their knowledge, the adoption is legally voidable. And what does an 11-year-old girl say when someone tells her everything she knows about her family is built on something that was taken from someone else? Ray didn't answer. Because there was no answer that didn't cost something. The FBI is handling the Garrett case with a dedicated child welfare specialist, he said finally. They're aware of the complexity. They're moving, slowly. Good, Carol said. She looked at the file. She thought about Elias, about what it meant to hold something true when everything around you applied sustained pressure in the opposite direction. She thought about Ava, about what it meant to have built something true, not knowing it had been built on someone else's loss. Both things were real at the same time. The best anyone could do was be honest about what was broken and very careful about what came next. Conrad Slade was arrested on a Wednesday morning. Ray called Carol at 7:14. She was in her car outside the courthouse, not yet ready to go in. They picked him up at his home, Ray said. 6:45, apparently in the middle of making breakfast. Did he resist? No. His attorney arrived in under an hour, which means he'd been told to expect something, or had been warned. A pause. They also picked up Pruitt. He was at his brother's house outside the city. Been there 3 days. Someone tipped him, but not fast enough. The Elwoods, later today. The warrant cleared an hour ago. Carol sat in the car. She thought about a hospital room 8 years ago that she had not been present for. A woman in a medicated haze. Papers placed in front of her by a man who understood exactly how vulnerable she was and moved with the precision of someone who had done it before. Who had done it 16 documented times before. Possibly more. Ray, she said. Yeah, make sure they get every count right. Nothing left on the table. Already on it, he said. She got out of the car. She went inside. She had a full docket that morning. Other cases, other children, other families with their own tangled circumstances. She was still a judge. For now, she was still that. Sandra and Tom Elwood were arrested at 2:17 in the afternoon. Elias was in art class when it happened. He was working on a drawing, a building, the shadow-to-light line he kept returning to, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He wasn't supposed to have it in class, but Renee had arranged quietly with the school that he keep it on in case. He looked at the screen under the table. A message from Carol. It's done, both of them. You're safe. He read it twice. He put the phone back in his pocket. He picked up his pencil and finished the drawing. Ray brought the Ava file to Carol's office on a Friday afternoon. He sat off her desk with the expression of a man who was not going to pretend the news was simple. During the Pruitt interviews, he said they identified another family, connected to New Dawn. They received a child through the agency in 2015. He tapped the file. The child's name is Ava. She's 11 now. She was placed with this family as an infant, 2 months old, when her first placement fell through. She's been with them 9 years. Carol opened the file. The family was named Garrett. Walter Garrett, a cardiologist, well-regarded, no prior complaints of any kind. His wife, Helen, taught high school. Their home had been reviewed twice in 9 years through standard foster oversight, both times rated exemplary. No red flags, no irregularities visible from the outside. Is there evidence they knew? Carol asked. Ray was quiet for a moment. Nothing conclusive. They paid New Dawn's listed adoption fee. High, but within the range that could be explained as legitimate private adoption costs. The documentation they received appeared complete on its face. Ava has been enrolled consistently in school. She has a pediatrician, a dentist. Her teachers describe her as settled and social. Carol closed the file. She opened it again. Ava's biological mother, she said. Her name is Patricia Owens, 34 years old now. She was 23 when Ava was born, single, no family support in state, entry-level administrative work. She received a stillbirth notification from Harborview General. Same pattern, same attending physician. Slade, yes, and Patricia Owens. She filed a complaint the following year. Got nowhere. She's been in therapy. She works. She functions. Ray looked at Carol. But she has not stopped looking. The room held that for a moment. This was the part that didn't resolve cleanly. The part the movies skipped because it didn't have a shape that felt like resolution. Justice for Patricia Owens existed in genuine, irresolvable tension with 9 years of a child's life. 9 years that were, by every measurable account, good years. Years of consistency and care, and a sense of belonging that Elias had not had, that no child should go without. And Patricia Owens had 9 years of something that also could not be undone. What does the law say? Carol asked, knowing the answer, asking anyway. The law says the Garretts received a child through a criminal enterprise, regardless of their knowledge. The adoption is legally voidable. And what does an 11-year-old girl say when someone tells her everything she knows about her family is built on something that was taken? Ray didn't answer. Because there was no answer that didn't cost something. The FBI is handling the Garrett case with a dedicated child welfare specialist, he said finally. They're aware of the complexity. They're moving slowly. Good, Carol said. She looked at the file. She thought about Elias, about the photograph he had carried through 6 placements, about the specific discipline required to hold something true when everything around you applied sustained pressure in the opposite direction. She thought about Ava, about what it meant to have built something true, not knowing it had been built on someone else's loss. Both things were true at the same time. The best that anyone could do, the only thing that anyone could do, was be honest about what was broken and very careful about what came next. Rhett Isnay's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building 12 minutes from the school they had chosen for Elias. The school was small, calm in the specific way of places that had been deliberately designed to be that way, rather than accidentally ending up there. His teacher was a woman named Ms. Bernard, patient in a way that was structural rather than soft, the way a well-built thing is patient under load. The first week, Elias spoke in class approximately twice. The second week, 4 times. The third week, Ms. Bernard stopped counting because it was no longer notable. He did not make friends quickly, but he made them carefully, which was more durable. By the end of the first month, there was a boy named Jerome who shared his interest in architectural drawing and who had, apparently, very strong opinions about which buildings in the city were worth drawing and which were not. They argued about this with the comfortable specificity of 2 people who care about the same thing enough to disagree about it. Renee watched all of this from the appropriate distance. She had been told by Dr. Burroughs not to hover. She had been told that the transition would be uneven, and that uneven was not the same as failing. She had been told that Elias would test the permanence of the arrangement in ways both visible and invisible, and that the correct response to every test was the same, still here. She had understood this intellectually. Living it was different. There were evenings he went very quiet in a way that had no visible cause. There were nights she heard him in the hallway at 2 in the morning, not distressed. Just moving, checking the rooms, verifying. She learned to leave her bedroom door open, so that when he came and stood in the doorway, she could say, without alarm, "Still here, go back to sleep." And he would. Most nights he would. There were also mornings when she made eggs and he told her the butter ratio was wrong, which she felt was probably a form of intimacy she had not been prepared for but was grateful for anyway. 3 weeks after he moved in, they were doing the dishes together. She washed. He dried. An arrangement he had proposed himself on the grounds that he was, in his words, significantly better at drying than anyone he had previously lived with, which she suspected was true. She handed him a plate. He said, "Mom, where do these go?" Just like that, not announced, not preceded by any visible decision. Just the word, dropped into the middle of an ordinary moment, like something that had always belonged there, and had finally found its way home. Renee stood with the next plate in her hand and did not move for a moment. Second shelf, she said. On the left. He put the plate away. They finished the dishes. Neither of them said anything about it. They didn't need to. Gloria Tate's legal situation developed the way Carol had feared it would. Harborview General's attorneys moved fast. They filed a civil action against Gloria for violation of patient privacy. Specifically, the documentation she had removed from the hospital over 8 years. The fact that the documentation had exposed a criminal operation running inside the hospital's walls did not, under the applicable statutes, immunize her from the underlying breach. A younger might have been optimistic about the whistleblower protections. The reality was more constrained. The relevant provisions had specific procedural requirements. Internal reporting through designated channels, documentation of those reports, waiting periods that Gloria had not followed. Not because she had been careless, because the designated internal channels were controlled by the same institution she was trying to expose, which was the particular grinding cruelty of certain legal structures. They assumed the person reporting harm could safely use the institution's systems at the precise moment when the institution's own systems were the problem. The judgment came down 6 weeks after the criminal arrests. Gloria lost, not everything, but a significant financial penalty. Enough to hurt in the way that penalties hurt when you are a retired nurse on a fixed income who made a decision based on conscience rather than calculation. Carol was in the hallway outside the courtroom when Gloria came out. She looked tired, not broken. That was the distinction Carol kept returning to. Tired in the way of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has finally set it down, even if the setting down cost something real. A reporter had positioned himself near the exit with the expectant look of someone hoping for visible distress. Gloria stopped. She looked at him steadily. "Mrs. Tate," he said, "do you have a response to your judgment?" She was quiet for a moment. Not composing, just choosing. "I was a nurse for 31 years, she said. "The first thing they teach you, before everything else, is first do no harm." They forgot that. A pause. "I didn't." She walked past him. Carol fell into step beside her. They walked in silence for half a block. "How are you?" Carol asked. "I've had worse days," Gloria said. Then, after a moment, "Actually, I haven't. But I've had days that felt worse, which I think matters more." Carol looked at her. "He's doing well," she said. "Elias. He called Renee Mom 3 weeks ago, in the middle of doing dishes." Gloria's step slowed. Yeah. They stopped at the corner. A bus went past. Someone on the opposite sidewalk was walking a dog that was trying to go in 4 directions at once. "You gave him something that lasted," Carol said. 3 years, through 3 more placements, and every adult who told him he was wrong to keep remembering. The photograph. The words "you" said to him, that held. Gloria looked at the street. "He would have found his way regardless," she said. "He's that kind of person." "He had help," Carol said. "You're kind, it matters." Gloria was quiet. Then she nodded. Once. Small. The nod of someone who needed to hear something and is not going to pretend they didn't. She turned and walked on. Carol watched her go. She thought about what justice actually looked like, up close and unfiltered. Not the version in the imagination, swift, clean, cost-free for the righteous. The real version, where the people who did right sometimes paid for it anyway. Where the structures built to protect people could be protected against people by those with enough access and enough patience. Where winning still left marks on the people who won. She thought about a recording made in a hospital office in February 2016 by a woman with a small recorder and a daughter in college, and a very precise calculation about how much she could risk. She thought about 31 years of nursing ending in a civil penalty. She turned and walked back to her car. She sat in it for a moment, without starting the engine. She thought about something Gloria had said at their second meeting, not today, but 3 weeks earlier, at the community health fair. They had been standing outside during a break, cups of bad coffee going cold in their hands, and Carol had asked her something she had been wondering about for months. She had asked, "Did you ever think about stopping?" In those 8 years, did you ever think about just letting it go? Gloria had looked at the parking lot for a moment. Then she had said, every day for the first 2 years. I had a daughter. I had a fixed income. I had a nursing license I still wanted to use. The risk was real, and I knew it was real. She had paused, and then she had said, but I also had a memory I couldn't put down. I was in that room. I held that baby for about 40 seconds before I understood what was happening. He made this face the way newborns do when they're trying to figure out what the air is. Like the world outside was something they needed to assess before committing. She had looked at Carol. He assessed the world even then, she had said. 8 years later, he walked into a courtroom and did the same thing. Some things don't change. Carol had not said anything to that. She had just held her bad coffee and understood that the woman standing next to her had made a decision, 40 seconds after meeting a newborn, that she had paid for across its 8 years and was still paying for, and had not stopped making it. Now Carol started the engine she drove. The sentencing hearings ran across several weeks in the fall. Conrad Slade appeared in court on a Tuesday, 64 years old. He had the bearing of a man who had spent his entire career being deferred to, and had not yet fully processed that this was finished. His attorney entered numerous motions. Most were denied. The audio recording from Gloria's binder was admitted. The financial records linking Slade to New Dawn were admitted. 7 families gave victim impact statements, some written, some in person, about what had been taken from them and what the years after had cost. Renee did not submit a written statement. She came in person. She sat in the gallery on the morning of sentencing with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, and she looked at Conrad Slade with the expression of a woman who had nothing left to prove and was fully aware of it. She did not speak. She didn't need to. Elias's letter was read into the record by the prosecutor, not by Elias himself. He was 9 years old, and this was not a burden he needed to carry into that room. But his words went in, clear and precise, and written in the handwriting of a child who had spent years noticing things other people walked past. The courtroom was quiet when the prosecutor finished reading. Not the performed quiet of people waiting for the next procedural step. The genuine quiet of people who had just heard something they were going to think about for a while. Slade did not look at the gallery during the reading. He looked at the table in front of him. Carol, who was present as a precise citizen rather than as a judge, watched him from 3 rows back. She had wondered, in the weeks leading to sentencing, whether she would feel something specific in this moment. Satisfaction, maybe. Or closure, that word people used when they meant the pain stopped. She felt neither. What she felt was something more like recognition. The recognition of a thing being correctly named after a long period of being called the wrong thing. A stillbirth that was not a stillbirth. A behavioral disorder that was not a disorder. A mother who was unstable, according to the record, for refusing to believe the record. All of it named now. Correctly, in a room built for exactly that purpose. It was not nothing. Conrad Slade received 26 years. Dwight Pruitt, who had cooperated with the FBI in exchange for reduced charges, received 14 years. The cooperation credit was contentious. 3 of the 7 families submitted statements, specifically objecting to it. The judge noted the objections and noted also that the Pruitt's cooperation had enabled the identification of victims in 4 additional states, and then this had to be weighed. Carol heard the Pruitt sentence and felt the familiar friction of justice that was both correct and unsatisfying at the same time. The friction did not resolve. She had learned, over 15 years on the bench, that it was not supposed to. The friction was information. It meant you were looking clearly. Tom Elwood received 11 years. Sansar Elch received 12. The additional year reflecting her direct operational role in New Dawn's child management procedures, which the prosecutor had documented in detail. Judge William Hartley, retired, Sarasota, the man who had signed off on 7 illegal adoptions without adequate review in routed Toa's law firm, was extradited and received 8 years. His attorney argued age and health. The judge noted both and sentenced anyway. 16 families formally connected to the New Dawn operation. 17 children matched through DNA testing to their biological mothers. The number was specific, and also, Carol knew, incomplete. There were cases that hadn't been found yet. Cases where the trail had gone cold. Cases where the children were old enough that the question of what to do with the information was its own complicated negotiation that would take years and possibly not resolve in any clean way. The Ava case was still moving slowly, as it should. The FBI's child welfare specialist had spent weeks in careful, patient conversations with Ava, with the Geggerets, and with Patricia Owens. Carol knew only the outline. But what she knew was this. Ava had been told, in careful, appropriate language, that the circumstances of her adoption had involved wrongdoing that was not the Garrett's fault and not hers. Patricia Owens had been told her daughter was alive and had made a decision, her decision honored by everyone involved, to write first rather than arrive, to extend an opening rather than force an answer, to let Ava decide what she wanted to do with the knowledge and at what pace. It was not a tidy resolution. It was a beginning of something that would take years and would take a shape nobody had yet imagined. Which was, Carol had come to understand, often the most truthful thing justice could offer. Not the ending. Just the space to begin again. Carol submitted her recusals notice 3 weeks after the final sentencing hearing. Formal, precise. It cited her personal connection to parties in the investigation and her involvement in the evidentiary process leading to the arrests, and it recommended a full review of all procedures she had touched in connection with New Dawn. She also requested a leave of absence, not because it was required, because she needed to think. Because 15 years of sitting in that room, looking at children in the front rows of courtrooms, at files and names and dates and the careful language of systems for processing human circumstances. 15 years of doing it correctly and with appropriate professional distance. And then this particular case, this particular boy. She needed to understand what the distance had cost, whether it was the only way. Whether there was a version of the work that didn't require keeping yourself slightly outside the room in order to function inside it. She spent the first month doing very little. That was new. She had not, in recent memory, allowed herself to do very little. She walked. She cooked things she had not cooked in years. She called people she had let friendships lapse with. Uncomfortable conversations that were also necessary ones. She visited Gloria twice. Once at Gloria's apartment, where they drank tea and talked about nothing in particular for 2 hours, which felt spikes like exactly the right thing. The second time at a community health fair, where Gloria had started volunteering 2 mornings a week, sitting at a table with pamphlets about maternal health and prenatal care, and the rights of patients during labor and delivery. Doing in a modest and specific way what she could do now with what she knew. Carol sat with her at the table for an hour. She answered questions from 2 women who came by with forms they didn't understand. She helped a young man write pamphlet for his wife, who was 8 months along and didn't speak much English, and was frightened of the hospital. She was not good at it, not yet. But she stayed. She thought regularly about Ava. She thought about the Fliegsitter family sitting in a nation that had restructured everything they believed about their own history, trying to find a way to hold it that didn't destroy what they had also genuinely built. She thought about Patricia Owens somewhere in the city, writing a letter and rewriting it, trying to find words for something that had no template, because nothing like it had happened to her before. And there was no script for it. She thought about the word justice and what it actually meant when you stripped away the version that lived in the imagination. It meant as accurate as possible, as complete as possible, at significant cost, to multiple people, including some who did not deserve to pay it and paid it anyway. It meant better than before and still not enough, and the work continues. It always continued. In the second month of her leave, Carol began volunteering at a family advocacy organization 3 days a week. The work was not what she expected. It was sitting in a waiting room with parents, trying to understand paperwork written in a language technically called English, but functionally inaccessible to anyone without a law degree and sufficient time. It was accompanying families to preliminary hearings and translating procedural language into something human. It's talking to children who had been trained by experience to expect adults to say things they didn't mean. She had spent 15 years working with families. She discovered, inside of 2 weeks, that she had spent 15 years working above them. From the bench, you had authority. You had the literal elevation of the position. The raised surface, the robe, the deference built into the architecture of the room itself. You made decisions about people's lives, and you tried to make them correctly, and you brought expertise and genuine care to the making. But you were not beside them. Sitting beside someone at the same table with the same paperwork in front of both of you, with no differential built into the furniture, required something different. A different kind of listening. A different speed. A different understanding of what it meant to be useful to someone who did not have the luxury of distance. She was not good at it at first. That surprised her more than anything else that year. She kept working at it. She thought, during those weeks, about a boy who had spent 8 years in rooms where the adults held all the authority and he held none, who had nonetheless managed to preserve one true thing through all of it, not by fighting the authority. He was 8 years old. He had no weapons for that. But by holding quietly to what he knew and waiting for the room that would finally receive it. She thought about Courtroom 9 on a morning in October. A boy with a photograph. A room that went still. She was going to spend the rest of her career making those rooms better. One procedural reform at a time. One family at a time. One child sitting in a front row somewhere who deserved to be looked at like a question worth answering rather than a file to be processed. She kept working at it. Elias wrote the letter in November. He had been at Renee's apartment for 8 weeks by then. His room had his drawings on the walls, 12 of them, arranged in an order that made sense to him and that Renee had not questioned. A blue bedspread he had chosen himself at the store, standing in the aisle for 4 minutes, considering his options before deciding. A lamp whose light he described as the right temperature, which Renee understood to mean warm rather than institutional, and which she had bought him without a comment. He sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. He had told Renee he wanted to write something. For the restitution hearing, a formal victim impact statement that the court had invited from any affected party. But he didn't want to write it the way those things were usually written. He had read one once in a file that Patricia had accidentally left open, and it had made him feel like the person who wrote it was trying really bad rather than trying to say something true. He wanted to say something true. Renee made tea and sat at the far end of the table with her phone and did not offer to help because he had not asked for help. When he finished, he read it over once, then he slid it across the table to her. She read it slowly. The letter was written in the precise language of a 9-year-old who had spent years noticing things other people walked past. It said that he had been told many times to forget by many different people in many different places. That forgetting, they implied, would make things easier for him, for them, for the management of the situation. He had not done this, not because he was difficult, not because there was something wrong with how he processed the world, but because he had understood, in some way he could not yet fully name, that the true thing inside him was worth protecting, and that if he let them take it, they would have taken everything. He wrote that he was not saying this for himself. He said it because he knew there were other kids, still in places where someone was telling them their memories were wrong, still learning to make themselves small enough not to be noticed. He had heard one of them crying at 3 in the morning in the Elwood house, very quiet. trying not to take up space. He wanted whoever read the letter to think about those kids, not about him. He was fine now. He was more than fine. But they might not yet know they were allowed to be. Renee set the letter down. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at him. "Elias," she said. He was already looking at her, that steady look, which had not disappeared but had changed underneath. Something warmer now. Something that was choosing consciously to be present. "You can just say it's good," he said. "It's good," she said. "It's more than good." He nodded, like he'd known. "Can I change this part?" He pointed to the second paragraph. "I think I said the same thing twice." She looked. He had, in fact, said the same thing twice. "Yes," she said, "you can change it." He pulled the paper back, picked up his pencil, fixed it. She watched him work and thought about the first time she had seen his face. Across a conference table. A woman who had not yet earned the right to be called anything. Looking at a boy who had been told by 6 different households that he was the problem, who had held one true thing through all of it, careful as a flame in wind. She thought about what it had cost him. She thought about what it had cost Gloria, what it had cost her, what it still cost Patricia Owens every day she waited for an answer from a daughter she had never held. She thought about Slade in a federal facility, probably already running calculations about appeals, efficient to the last. That was the thing about people clockics. They didn't stop calculating. They just recalculated with new variables. She thought about the word worth. What things were worth, what the keeping of a true thing costs, and what it makes possible when you reach the other side of the cost. Her son was sitting across from her, fixing a sentence. She picked up her tea. She let him work. The day Carol returned to the courthouse was in early December. Not to the bench, not officially. Her leave extended through the new year, and the review process was still ongoing. She had a meeting with the chief of family court about proposed procedural reforms she had been drafting. Specifically, mandatory independent oversight for any placement involving agencies with histories of financial irregularities. A requirement for secondary review of any stillbirth documentation at facilities also operating private adoption referral services. A provision allowing social workers to flag patterns of accelerated judicial processing for external audit. Small changes, specific changes, the kind that didn't make headlines but built incrementally toward a system that was harder to exploit. She walked in through the main entrance. She passed the corridor. She passed courtroom 9. The door was closed. Session in progress. She could hear faintly, through the heavy wood, a voice. Professional, even. The measured cadence of someone trained to carry authority without aggression. She stopped. She stood outside the door for a moment. She thought about October, a boy with a photograph, a room that went still. 4 words spoken into that stillness, not as a plea but as a statement of fact, calm clear. The voice of someone who had held one true thing. For so long it had become the floor beneath his feet. She thought about what that took. Not courage in the cinematic sense. Not a decision made in a moment of inspiration or adrenaline. Something more sustained. Something built over years of choosing, every time the pressure came, to hold rather than release. To keep the true thing safe, even when it makes it cost something. Even when letting it go would have been so much easier. She had been a judge for 15 years. She had sat in rooms where that kind of holding was required of children regularly. She had not always understood what she was looking at when she saw it. She understood now. She was going to make those rooms better. She walked on. 9 months after the first hearing, on a Monday morning in late spring, Ms. Bernard did the check-in exercise she did every week. Around the room, one thing. Whatever is true right now. A boy named Jerome said he was annoyed because someone had eaten his lunch. A girl named Delia said her grandmother was coming to visit and she had mixed feelings about it, which made the class laugh. Others, small truths, the kind that are easy to say because they don't ask too much of the room. Then it was Elias's turn. He sat for a moment. Not nervous. This room had stopped making him nervous 6 weeks in. Ms. Bernard's class had a quality he had not encountered before. Not loud, not performing, just actual. People said actual things, and the room received them without making it complicated. He looked at Ms. Bernard. He said, I never stopped remembering. Even when everyone told me to forget. The room was quiet, not uncomfortable, not require anything from him, just receiving it. Ms. Bernard nodded slowly. That's a brave thing, she said. Elias thought about this, turned it over the way he turned most things over, carefully, without rushing. I don't think I was being brave, he said. I just didn't know how to stop. Sometimes, Ms. Bernard said, those are the same thing. He sat with that. Jerome started talking about his missing lunch again, and the room moved forward the way rooms do. One moment, giving way to the next, the serious and the ordinary sitting right beside each other, the way they always did in real life, without apology. Elias picked up his pencil. He opened his sketchbook to a fresh page. He had been thinking about a new drawing. Not buildings this time. Or not only buildings. He wanted to draw the courtroom. Not the way it looked in his memory, which was big and frightening and full of people whose intentions he couldn't read. The way it looked in his understanding of it now. Smaller, more specific. A room where a particular true thing had finally been said out loud and received. He sketched the outline, the bench, the windows, the light. A small figure in the front row, hands around something. He looked at what he'd drawn. He kept going. That evening, Renee made dinner. Not something quick, something that took time. A recipe her mother Adele had taught her, the kind of dish that fills an apartment with a particular smell that is also a kind of memory. She hadn't made it in years. Making it alone, in the years after Elias was taken, had felt like too much. Like setting a table for someone who wasn't there. He was here now. Elias sat at the counter, sketchbook open in front of him, pencil moving in small adjustments across the courtroom drawing he had started in class. He did this, kept his hands busy even when his attention was elsewhere. She had learned not to interpret it as absence. Meant comfort. It had taken her 3 weeks to understand that, and she considered it one of the more important things she had learned about him. He looked up from his work. Mom. Yeah. Do you think the other kids will find their moms? She kept stirring. She had learned not to rush her answers with him. He didn't need them fast. He needed them true. Some already have, she said, because of what you did, because you spoke up. I didn't do it for that. I know. She turned the heat down. You did it because you needed to, and it helped other people anyway. She looked at him across the counter. That happens sometimes. You do the thing you need to do, and it turns out others needed it too. He absorbed this, looked at his drawing. Then, a few minutes later, the little girl, from the Elwoods, the one who cried at night. Yes, did they find her? Renee paused. Agent Flores told me last week, she said carefully. She's safe. She's with family. Elias was quiet. Good, he said. The word of someone who means it completely and doesn't need to do anything more with it. Not relief, exactly. Something quieter than relief. The settling of something that had been unresolved of. Then, what is that smell? Something my mother taught me. Your mom. He looked up, a grandmother. There it was. The question she had been both expecting and entirely unprepared for. Because you cannot prepare for these moments. You can only sit in enough to catch them when they arrive. Yes, she said. Her name is Adele. She lives about 3 hours from here. She has extremely strong opinions about how rice should be cooked, and she cannot be reasoned with on the subject, which I say with love. She paused. She has called me every week since October asking about you. Elias considered this. Does she know how to make this? He gestured toward the pot. She taught me. He looked at the pot for a moment. Then he looked back at his drawing. Okay, he said. Just okay. The word of someone receiving new information and placing it correctly in the order of things. Not overwhelmed, not performing, just expanding the map. He went back to his drawing. Renee turned back to the stove. Outside the kitchen window, the city is doing at what cities do in late spring. People moving at a different pace than they did in winter. the light lasting longer, the evening in no particular hurry to end. Down on the street, someone was playing music from a phone, too quiet to identify the song, but loud enough to know there was one. Elias set down his pencil. He looked at the courtroom drawing. Something wasn't right about the light in the windows. Too flat. He had drawn it the way he remembered it being, institutional even, the kind of light that doesn't come from anywhere specific. But that wasn't how he remembered the morning itself. He remembered the light coming through the east windows in long, pale stripes across the floor. He remembered thinking in that particular way he had of noticing things, that the stripes looked like something was being sorted. He picked up his pencil. He fixed the light. He looked at it, better, not finished, but closer. He turned the page. He opened to the drawing he had been working on for a week. The view from this apartment window, the building across the street, the evening light through the gap between two buildings hitting the sidewalk at an angle that only lasted about 12 minutes before the sun moved and it became something else. He had almost had it yesterday. He made two small adjustments. A line repositioned, the shadow on the left edge deepened. He looked at it. He looked at the window. He looked back at the drawing. He had it. The almost part. The in-between moment. The light exactly was right now, this evening, in this apartment, in this life that had taken 9 years of holding on to find. He set down his pencil. His mother was at the stove. The apartment smelled like something that had been worth waiting for. Somewhere 3 hours away, a woman named Adele was probably at this very moment having strong opinions about rice. He was 9 years old. He had a sketchbook and a lamp with the right temperature light and a bedspread he had chosen himself. He had stopped checking the door before he slept. He looked at the drawing once more. The light, the almost moment, the thing that only lasted 12 minutes and then became something else. He had held it. He picked up his pencil again. Not because the drawing needed anything more, but because his hands liked to be moving, and moving felt like being here, and being here was the thing he had been trying to find his way back to for as long as he could remember. He was here. He was home. The evening light held for another few minutes outside the window, then shifted into something softer, the way it does when the day decides it's finally ready to let go. And in the kitchen, his mother stirred something that smelled like belonging, and the city went on below the window, and the drawing on the page in front of him was finished. Complete, accurate, true. The almost moment caught and kept exactly as it had been, before it became something else, before it was gone.